Welcome to the Living Medicine Podcast, where we talk about ethical medical use of psychedelic psychotherapy, teaching skills, examining the issues, and interviewing interesting people. Now let's start today's show. Hey, Bill.
Hi there.
It is so nice to see you again.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for doing this. And I did get that article you sent me. So that was awesome.
It's very concise and focused, but I think it's digestible by a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd like to actually talk through it a bit because our audience is kind of either new or aspiring psychedelic medicine practitioners, like in clinical settings.
Uh-huh.
And they really are craving sort of advice and how-tos and, what to do, what not to do at that stage of their career. So it's really helpful. But I also want to talk to you about all of the sort of meta stuff as well, which you are particularly kind of a wisdom keeper for. So I'll say a little bit.
I'll go, as I said, I'll go just about anywhere with you. Let's enjoy hanging out together and see what happens.
I wanted to tell you that, I talk to a lot of people in this job, but you're one of the few people that Evan I've talked to before after I get off and I think that was fun.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, it was really educational, but also fun.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that about talking to you. And I do want to say one thing, like one heartfelt piece is that I have benefited, as have most of the people that I am around in psychedelic community, from you as a sort of collective mentor. You haven't met many of the people that you are a mentor for because of the way that, you speak from, you have a lot of earned, lived experience, wisdom in this space, that because you do so much speaking and teaching and because of your book, you've mentored a lot of people without even knowing most of them. So I don't know, that must be a strange feeling, but I just wanted to know
it is like I meet all kinds of people that say, well, of course you know me because I've read your book. And, no, I'm sorry. You do look familiar. Yeah. You have a head and two arms and two legs like most of the people I talk to.
Yeah. They feel like they know you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you hear this a lot, but you're one of those people who's one person who has influenced many. And I just always think it's interesting to talk to people like that. It's such a thing. And I know you probably didn't set out early in your career thinking that would be the case, but that's where you find yourself now. So
right.
I'll share the collective gratitude that we all hold for that.
Right. It's kind of humbling, but I need to acknowledge it, and
it's a kind of really beautiful, big thing. It's a big deal, I think. So, for those
what mischief you'll get into as your life unfolds,
Yeah.
I mean, you already are
there is
authority,
Well, you've already got me off my talking points, but that's okay. That's why it's fun, because I want to tell you, there is this funny thing about following the breadcrumbs of life. Like you can see in retrospect, you can't see it when you're in it. But one example of that, one thing you and I have in common, I don't know if I've told you, is that my undergraduate degree was in comparative religion.
Oh, nice. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So before I was a psychedelic person, way back when I was, in undergrad, I was really interested in the commonalities of the religious experiences across religions. So that's what my degree was in. And of course, I was particularly intrigued by this mystical experience as formative to the very different world religions. And I say, of course, because in retrospect now, as a psychedelic person, I can see why I had that interest. At the time, I had no idea I would be a psychedelic person.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was also really like a Carl Jung geek. I was like a self-taught Carl Jung fan. And I was fascinated by this concept of the collective unconscious. So that was years ago. When I look back on that now, I say, oh, okay, I was kind of training myself to, when I went to medical school, I thought I would just be a primary care doc. I didn't know I would go into psychiatry and then psychedelics. And then, it's funny when you look back, you go, oh, my life was sort of, almost like steering me in that direction, but I didn't know it.
I can hardly wait to see who I'm becoming.
Yeah. You
I
and me both.
I tell you, Signy, I still might be a musician when I grow up. Yeah.
Well, I could see you doing that actually, because of you are very connected to music, as we know.
Right.
So I do want to say a little bit about you. Most of my audience knows who you are. If you guys don't know who Bill is, read anything on the web. There's a lot of information, but some of the just more famous tidbits about you are that you have been in psychedelics, or your life has been influenced by psychedelics since 1963, and that you were in that first wave of psychedelic research in the 60s and 70s. Bill was a prominent figure in that first wave of research, and then came back as a prominent figure in the second wave of psychedelic research more recently at Johns Hopkins and then now at Sunstone Therapies. You also teach at the California Institute for Integral Studies. And I believe, aren't you doing a workshop this summer before psychedelic science, right?
Yes,
So
yeah.
yeah,
My
those of you
son
attending,
Brian and I agreed to do an all-day workshop in
yeah, for
Denver. Yeah.
those of you attending psychedelic science this summer in Denver this is on June 17th, and it's a full day workshop. And you would be a fool not to go to that if you have the opportunity, because I know, Bill, I know you probably think I'm throwing a lot of compliments your way, but some of this I think I'm saying also for my audience. Like you do have a way of teaching that is not just heady. It's kind of very, I think you teach from a place of your heart and have this kind of authenticity that, is very valuable and sort of reflective of those of us who are in you know, psychedelic world. I think it's like it respects the psychedelic reality by the way that you show up, if that makes sense. I don't know if I worded that eloquently, but so June 17th in Denver, that's happening. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your book before I start picking your brain today for my listeners. So those of you who have not read this, go out and get it. And I will put a link in the description for the podcast, but it's called Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics and Religious Experience. And this book is really a great example, I think, of you, Bill, as like a bridge person. And by bridge person, I mean someone who has a foot in science and research, the scientific method, but another foot in sort of in-depth study of and lived experience of the spiritual, and being willing to name that and kind of
Mhm.
look at that interface really honestly. And it's such an obvious interface that we need to look at, and yet a lot of science people are hesitant to do that. And then a lot of
Yeah.
more spiritual people are kind of less appreciative of the science. And so I think that you do this beautiful thing of like saying it has to be both and kind of
Yeah.
bridging.
Yeah,
And
I can do that without apology because, I am a clinical psychologist and researcher, but I did spend 4 years in theological schools. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, I've got the right letters after my name to do both.
yes.
And,
You get
uh,
to say you're actual expert in both, and this is
yeah,
what you think. And so this was really a seminal, informative book for a lot of the recent people moving into the psychedelic field. And so those of you who are just not aware of it, please go get it. And it also touches on some of these things we already named, like common religious experiences, this idea of the collective unconscious, um, and some, I would say, some sort of more meta, what is the nature of reality? And these are things that are, you don't often quite touch on in psychedelic medicine trainings per se, that are really important for a lot of the individuals getting into the field to actually sit with for themselves, though. And so I value that in that book as well. So, all of that being said, thank you for talking to me. And I wanted to ask you a few things today from the perspective of our audience for this podcast, which is a growing audience of people, like I said, who are getting into this work and starting to do it. A lot of our trainee community or trainees coming through other training programs. And they're trained and they're doing the work, but they're aware that they're kind of on the edge of something new, and they're always looking for advice or checking, more supervision on what they're doing. And so I'm trying to ask experts out there, like, things that would be helpful for them. And I thought we would go through some of the points in the article you sent me that were just great, like teaching points for clinicians. Um, and this is in some sense getting your advice for the rest of us. I think, didn't it? I read,
I think that the core counsel, uh, beyond all the guidelines and techniques, is just to authentically be yourself, to be beside the patient, volunteer, facilitating, supporting, but not going into trying to fix the person like a car mechanic. You know, we're
yes,
more like midwives, really. Yeah.
yes. I love that midwife analogy too. Do you think that if someone goes in being a little bit performative or fake accidentally or because they're nervous or something like that, that that affects the client's experience if the therapist goes in that
Yeah.
way? Yeah.
Well, I think every dyad of therapist and client is unique. You know, you can't just apply a manual, you know, and you kind of tune into that particular person where
Mhm.
that person is in life and support them and um, just be with them as they discover the healing processes that unfold in their own minds.
Yes. So from the point of view of the therapist, it takes some humility because you have to drop out of thinking you, quote, know what to do, and you have to just be very relationally present together.
That's right. And trust your own mind, your own intuition, you know,
Hmm.
and be grounded. Mhm.
Do you feel like it's almost like a bit of an altered state for the therapist that you induce in yourself in order to do that?
Certainly, I don't like that word altered state, I'd rather say alternate state. Um,
Because we have the choice of many states.
it's a very focused, centered state. It's being present with the person. Uh,
Yes.
you don't play with your iPhone,
Yes.
You're right. You're really there with the person, open
Yes.
as if in that hour or whatever it is, there's no one in the universe except the two of you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've heard the word attunement used.
Yeah.
And my colleague Sandy Newis, who teaches with me, she uses this phrase "in the bubble," being in their bubble. But
Uh-huh.
she means that she means you tune out the outside world and you go into this place where just the two of you are that is different,
That's
and
right.
you're sort of tracking the person differently and attuning to them differently. And it's kind of hard to describe, but you know what's that phrase? You know it when you see it, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. It's a felt sense of that. And it is a little hard to describe, but I notice running a training program that you can kind of can see when people are just able to do it, or some therapists that are less able to do that because they can't get out of their own head that's analyzing.
Hmm.
So I think a great piece of advice is to sort of be curious about what this state is that you're describing and learn to attune in that
Yeah.
way.
And to be willing to learn from each patient, you know?
Mm,
And their processes, their minds, their unique way of experiencing healing.
mm. Yeah, you almost have to be in the moment to observe what's coming up with them rather than
Right.
having a preconceived idea of what's going to happen that you put on from the.
Yeah, in my experience, really what happens in a well-grounded session with the major psychedelics anyway, is like ingeniously choreographed by the mind of the patient.
Yeah,
And usually what happens turns out to be better than anything you could have planned and tried to facilitate. Like if I thought, well, God, this guy needs to regress to age 12 and relive his alcohol
right.
father coming home. And, like if I tried to meddle and manipulate and do my hypnosis, it would be ridiculous. If
Yeah,
you just provide this atmosphere of respect, unconditional acceptance, genuineness, the psyche emerges and heals.
I love that. So don't have an agenda, and even an unconscious agenda for your client.
That's right.
Just
And be willing
I
to
had a
be
team.
surprised. You know, in the ayahuasca traditions, when you take the sacrament, you go in for a lesson from the teacher. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and like I don't know what the lesson is today, but we'll find out. You know, and it might be enjoyable, it might be scary, um, but it's going to be a step forward. You know,
Yeah, we have a thing where we tell our trainees when we're trying to convey this that your main job is to be curious and pay attention.
that's right,
And pay attention, be curious and pay attention. And then
right.
because something will emerge that comes from the client, unconscious or whatever words we want to call for that. It emerges from something that isn't you, the therapist. You are not
That's right.
creating whatever's happening at all. Yeah. It's a really, and I have to say, like, this is kind of one of the more moving parts of the work, but also the thing that's humbling about it. Like
Yeah.
for me, when that happens, it's so humbling as a provider to go, oh my gosh, I just witnessed this. I
Yeah.
didn't make this happen in any way.
Probably the phrase we use most, silently or spoken, is in and through, in and through. Whatever manifests, you embrace it, you dive into it, you're curious about it, you participate in it.
Mhm.
You don't hold it at bay and think about it, you know? And there's no succeeding or failing, you know? A session may open up in absolutely exquisitely beautiful, meaningful, sacred ways. And it may also open up into the darkest, scariest dungeon of childhood
Yeah.
trauma, you know?
Yeah.
And one isn't good and one isn't bad, you know? They're both part of the journey, you know?
Mm.
And you trust your own mind and meet whatever emerges as it comes, you know, and the therapist is with you, you know.
So as a therapist, those moments that the client does open up into the darker dungeons or the trauma, what advice do you have for like how to hold yourself as the therapist? I think, you know, it is act true. Like sometimes these journeys go to dark places.
Yeah.
And so if you're a new therapist, what do you need to do in those moments? You said in and through. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. You need to trust yourself, trust the patient's mind, trust your being together, trust that I've come to believe that if something emerges, that means the person's ready to deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't go on an archaeological expedition looking for traumas, you know, but when uh, whatever it is emerges into consciousness, that's an invitation to meet it and work with it and explore it and go through it. And I'll go anywhere with you, you know,
Yeah.
I'll be with you, you know, sex or death or God. I'm not afraid of any of them,
Yeah.
you know.
Yes, I think that's very powerful for the client to know that the therapist feels safe and at ease with anything kind of content. And when they know the
That's
therapist feels that,
right.
it's a permission.
And that attitude really develops out of experience. You know, you can read about it, you can entertain it as a hypothesis, but it's as you work with more and more people and you discover that it's valid, I think, you know,
Yeah.
then you relax more and you don't, oh my gosh, is the person getting psychotic? Where are the rescue meds?
Yes.
You know, and you
Yeah.
start getting tense and anxious, and then that's contagious.
It is.
And
Yeah.
the patient gets tense and anxious, you know, should
Yeah.
we
I'm so glad you
terminate
said
this?
that. Yes. The
You know,
patient is very
no, no,
cued to us. The client and
go
patient.
with it. Go with it. I'm with you. You know?
Yeah, I often do supervision with beginners, and I say things like, if the client gets afraid, the first thing to do is to track yourself. Like
That's
It's
right.
important that you don't be afraid just because
That's
your
right.
client is afraid.
That's right.
And it, and really, and then there's this a teaching there about like if that is hard for you to do, then you need to do your own work, kind of
That's right.
to be able to hold this for other people. Like if you can't regulate yourself in that and around that, then you're not quite ready yet, or just do some of your own work there because your responsibility is to be present in that way with with the
Right.
client the way that you.
You need to take a deep breath
Yeah,
and affirm trust, let
yeah.
go, be open, accept, be, you know,
Yeah, I've heard you talk quite a lot about like trust, let go, be open. I know that's almost a mantra in a
it
way
is a
in the
mantra.
field now. I think it came
Yeah,
from you originally, but and I believe when you say that you're referring to what in my little community we call dropping in, but it's this sense of trust and falling back into the experience and letting whatever happens happens.
yeah,
Um, and that is something I think I think you're educating the client, the patient on ahead of time in preparation. Is that
that's
right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's part of prep. And I think it's incredibly important that one chooses to trust, that I'm not just passive. I'll receive this substance and see what happens. You know,
Okay.
no, I choose to receive this substance and I look forward to encountering, meeting, wrestling with, learning from whatever emerges. Okay.
Ah, that's good.
Like I'm an explorer going into my own consciousness. And if there's dragons in there, I want to meet them and tame them.
Okay, I like that. I'm going to add something to what I do from that because
Good.
I think what you touched on there is not just dropping in, what I call releasing, but it's also you're
Right.
making a statement that I am
It
willing.
dive. The image I have is being on a high dive,
Yes.
ready to dive into a swimming pool, and you don't know the depth or the temperature of the water. But you know that others have done it, and you've got a good lifeguard beside you, you know, but no one's going to push you off the diving board, you know.
Yeah, you have to jump.
You choose to dive,
Oh,
you know.
that's really powerful because first, that's an act of courage.
Yeah, it is courage.
Yeah, and second, it's very much speaking from my own Jungian and all that world that I know you share.
Right.
That's an initiatory journey, the jumping into the unknown
That's
willingly,
right. Uh-huh.
willingly. Yeah, and I think that's very powerful. I think I'm going to change, maybe incorporate when I talk about dropping in or what you're calling kind of like
Yeah.
trust, go be open. There's also this piece around willingness. Like I am also willing to show up for whatever challenges or
Right.
fearful things
And
or
I'm not just looking for some new drug to make me feel better, you know? Like I tried my my Ritalin or my SSRI and that didn't do much, so now I'll try my ketamine or whatever. That framework isn't helpful. But the ketamine or the other psychedelic gives me an opportunity to wake up more fully, to
Mm.
um, deal, discover, interact with parts of me that have always been there, but I've been separated from them, you know?
Yeah, and some of those things are going to be scary.
That's right.
Not every time, but that
Well,
possibility is
listen,
there. Yeah.
uh, good movies have some scary parts. Yeah, it's okay to be scared. Uh,
That's such an important conversation to have in preparation because obviously we're all afraid to be afraid. And
yeah, that's
I
right.
think again, circling back to the thing we said earlier, as a therapist, you need to not be afraid of your patient being afraid,
Yeah,
but you also maybe need to have more of a conversation with them about being willing to be afraid if that is where the
sure.
journey takes them.
All it is fear in and through. Most of us have been scared now and then.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the end of the world. It's part of the terrain. And fear can be very close to excitement too.
Can you
I'm
say
on
more
the
about that?
I'm on the verge of discovering something new,
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It does seem like, and I know that I'm not the first person to say this, but when people do move into or through or towards feared objects or situations in a journey, that something new unfolds on the other side of that,
yeah,
or something unexpected in a positive sense.
yeah. There's also a certain call it intention. Like, damn it, this is my mind. I have a right to know what's going on in it.
Yeah.
That's why we use this image of stomping down into the basement of your mind with a bright flashlight and looking in the darkest corners you can find with this attitude. If there's something down here that's generating depression and anxiety, I want to know what it is. Show your face,
Yeah.
monster. I have a right to know this is my mind after all. Okay? But that instead of, oh no, I don't want to go down in the basement because who knows what's down there.
Yeah.
It's like, if there's a monster, it's my very own monster, and I want to know what it's made of and how it got created and how I can tame it, you know?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this because, of course, this is some of the most important aspects of this work. And I also feel that a lot of clients or patients come in a little bit biased towards wanting to have a blissful experience of a unity
Uh-huh.
consciousness experience, and they
Sure.
thinking that, of course they want that. I get it. But you know, I share with you the idea that this is actually where a lot of the hard work that happens that
Yeah.
does unravel whatever knotted stuff is in your basement.
Yeah.
Here's your metaphor.
It's interesting
Really
how
powerful work.
it's been very interesting to me how some people in a first session will go straight to the blissful experience, you know,
Huh.
which is beautiful and full of love and joy and playfulness and life enhancing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And then in subsequent sessions, they deal with the psycholytic areas, the childhood struggles and guilt and grief and
Mhm.
uh, unresolved conflicts. And other people seem to j- just go up the mountain the other way. They go through conflict after conflict, and then they break through to the transcendental. Both
Interesting.
both ways work well.
It almost makes me wonder, and I will never be able to know if some deep wisdom in the client or the patient knows whether they need to be resourced first with a sense of blessedness or love or presence of
Uh-huh.
God, and then do the hard work, or whether they're ready to do the hard work and then will be more able to receive the blessedness.
Right,
Like I'm just curious, like some part of them may know that, but of course
right.
these are the mysteries that we don't.
Both work. I've been especially with people uh, struggling with addictions, who have lost jobs and relationships and health and may have very low self-worth, you know, think they're very alone and isolated in the world. When those people can tune into transcendental forms of consciousness and experience being unconditionally accepted and loved and know that there are all kinds of creative resources in their mind they never knew were there. Then afterwards they'll say, well, of course I can get control of my addiction. I have all these resources within me that I forgot were there.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a those moments are so like potent to witness too.
Yeah.
This
The
is
whole
like this is when
concept
you
of
start crying with your client because it's just really
it is,
powerful to witness. Yeah.
but the whole concept of the self changes. The idea of who I am and what I'm capable of and who other people are and what the nature of reality is.
In what ways? Like I am less limited than I believed. Or
Yeah, well, it's your view of the world is changed indelibly, I think, after a profound transcendental experience. It has to be integrated and applied. The old saying, it's easy to love all mankind, but loving your boss is something more difficult. You have to apply some of those insights, but there's a feeling of that you have every right to be on this planet, and so does the tree in your yard,
and I just want to reflect it's not just a belief, it's a felt sense of it. Like you actually feel it
Right.
as
It's
true.
not just a thought.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a it's intuitive knowledge, really.
You know it is true. Yeah. I
It's
think
like knowing that you love your spouse, you know? It's not a rational thing, you know?
yeah, I think that's a really beautiful description of sort of the therapeutic potential of the peak state. If you have to
That's
think about it
right.
that way, like not all journeys have peak states, and nor should we
Mhm.
aim for that to be the goal of every journey. But this is the way in which it can be super therapeutic um, for people who need that resource, to use a clinical word, in order to go on and do the hard things.
Yeah,
And then
those
interestingly, I have some clients that never have that experience and just do the hard things, and so I kind of I like hearing you say that because it is, but
yeah.
there's no predictability there.
They'll have their peak experiences when the time is right, you know? It's part, I certainly believe it's a potential within them, but you can't push it. Those experiences always come as gifts, I think. You can't make them happen, you know? You receive them when they come. You participate in them. Yeah.
Kind of like grace.
Yeah.
uh,
Grace,
Using
that's the
religion.
religious word.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a gift.
That's pretty well, I guess there's not real, like, it's an understatement to say that this is compelling, but this is what makes this whole world of psychedelics moving into mental health so compelling, because an experience of grace, which is, yes, it's a religious word, but this idea of being gifted love, acceptance, and a sort of known felt sense that you are okay, and that the healing power of that is just vastly astronomically higher than any Prozac or anything that we could think of in mental health treatment.
That's right.
So that's I think, and one of the things that keeps all of us so inspired and also humbled in the face of this kind of work.
Mhm.
So you've also taught, in some of like written form, about advice you give to people, this idea of turning off the intellect. And I wanted to ask if you could say a little more about that.
Yes. During the action of the psychedelic substance, it's critical that we turn off our rational minds. Instead of saying, "Oh, stop the world. I got to figure out what's going on. I got to put labels on this." That's called the defense mechanism of intellectualization.
Mm.
Okay. And those of us who are college educated are really good at it.
Yeah.
But no, you you say, I'm going to dive in, I'm going to experience, I'm going to collect experiences during the period of drug action here. And at the end of the day, I'll decide what words to put on it. Okay.
Hmm.
And I may draw from my knowledge of depth psychology and world religions and um, quantum physics, maybe. And, I'll choose my own words to describe it. But while it's happening, just participate in it, soak it up, experience it, and you'll experience so much more than if you have the brakes on, saying, stop the world, I got to figure out what's happening here. Yeah.
To quote my co-facilitator, Sandra Newis, again, but she uses this phrase, suspend the need to know. And I think that's a similar idea. Like
Uh,
suspend the need to know. When we're teaching trainees like how to work with in this work with clients, like
well,
um
there's more than one way of knowing. And our culture minimizes intuition. You know,
yeah.
there's reason and there's the irrational.
Mhm.
But and intuition is kind of a woman's hunch now and then. You know? But no, intuition um, is a respectable platonic way of discovering truth, of learning, of knowing.
Mhm.
And in our relationships, we trust intuition often. I know I love these people, these friends, my spouse, my children. It's not because I like the way they look or the shape of their nose or something. It's I just trust that intuition. And the religious life, whether institutional or more loosely spiritual, whatever that means, is also based on intuitive experiences and the values you choose to live by.
Is it almost like saying you may not understand it, but you just feel it? It's truth.
Yes. Yeah. And you choose to trust it.
Yeah, there's that willingness piece again that you keep bringing in. Like you're willing to show up for that or step into it or trust it.
That's right.
Yeah. Whether it's challenging material or affirming material, you kind of
Hmm.
have to be willing to receive that felt sense shift. Or I don't know, your words are a little bit better, but um, one language I use for this when I'm teaching trainees is this idea of the observer mind. You know how we always have that part of us that's
Hmm.
analyzing, that's on board. And it is true that with psychedelics, the higher your dose is, the more less likely that that might go away at
Yeah.
really high doses. But especially in more psycholytic doses, we have this observer mind on board. And for a lot of clients or patients, they do, I think what you're describing is just a tendency to want to analyze the process the whole time. Like they're like intellect is chattering away,
Yeah.
analyzing what's happening. And we're often trying to name that and sort of, invite them to, you know, let that be there, but to just like set it aside a bit and
Sure.
and do what I
Uh,
think you're saying, which is just feel what's happening and show up for what's happening, even if you don't have a quote story that explains it to you in a way that makes sense in your
right.
head.
In preparation, we often uh, talk through this little discussion with the intellect, and
Yeah.
it kind of says, you're so wonderful and clever and bright, and you got me through graduate school, and you're really cool. But during the action of the psychedelic tomorrow, you go out and play, you know? And I promise you, when you come back in, I'll give you all these new experiences to think about, but
Yeah, I love that.
you go out and play. You're a wonderful intellect, but you go out and play, while I have this experience. Yeah.
That is great. I don't do that, but I think I'm gonna add that in. This idea of almost formalizing, prompting the patient to like have a little conversation with their intellect and ask it to
That's right.
just step aside for a little while.
That's right. I mean, I love you and all that, and you're clever, but uh, don't mess up my session tomorrow.
Yeah. Yes. There is sometimes we've talked about there is a sort of showing up in your what I call like your child mind.
Uh,
The way that you would have received this experience as a little kid before you would intellectualize everything and you would just,
uh,
little kids understand intuitively that things can be magical then things can happen, and yet they just sort of are present and witnessing it, and they're less sitting back going, well, this might be such and such, and creating some sort of story about it. Um, so I think that's pretty beautiful. I'm gonna start adding that in. Add it
Yeah.
into teaching too.
There's a framework. I should write an article on it. I haven't done it yet. Of uh, the based on the philosophy of the psychiatrist Karl Jaspers.
Mm,
I don't know if you're a German existentialist.
mm,
uh, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. But his model is basically, you have to decipher all the big German words, but that you go into the psyche and you encounter what he called Grenzsituationen, boundary situations. And that's stuff like guilt and grief and shame and traumas of different kinds. But you go in and you don't run away from those things. You penetrate right into the middle of them. You go
mm.
in and through them. And you do that with what he called philosophical faith, to distinguish it from adherence to a religious creed, like a religious
Right.
faith. But it's the act of choosing to trust. Okay? I entrust myself. I go in and through these painful areas that present themselves. And he says that when you do that, you dive deeply into the grief and the guilt,
Mm.
that then you discover that you are met deep in the psyche by what he called the unbedingte Forderung, which is basically the creative power of love that heals and reconciles.
Wow, I have
How's
never
that
read
for a
that.
model of psychedelic therapy,
I
right?
Yes, I have never read that, but it almost sounds like he's been doing psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I've often wondered if he and Martin Buber took mescaline together, but I can't find it. I can't find any evidence. But if
Yeah.
so, it would have been totally legal and nothing out of the ordinary to talk about.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of
But
famous people in history. I look back and think, did they take psychedelics?
yeah, or did they just have spontaneous
Yeah.
transcendental experiences?
Yes.
The Abe Maslows and Eleanor Roosevelts and Albert Einsteins of the world?
Mhm. Yeah, Einstein has always been a big one. I'm like, what was something? He definitely had some mystical
Yeah.
experiences. Like this, just the way he spoke. Okay, that's very interesting. And this idea of philosophical faith that it's almost like they don't have to believe in God in the Judeo-Christian
Right.
sense. They have to believe that there is something, though. Like
Yeah.
there's something.
To choose to entrust yourself to something deep
Yeah.
within
And
consciousness.
that, again, is an act of courage
That's right.
because you don't rationally know that whether there is anything or not. And yet you're going to choose to like entrust yourself to the possibility of
Yeah.
this thing. And I think that is such a potent moment. Like there's so much power to that choice right there because then something shows up, whether it comes from an outside spiritual resource or something that's in you that deeply, and I don't know the answer to that. I won't, but I have witnessed it show up for people. And so what is that's fascinating that he described it that way. Yeah, you should write that article, Bill. It'd be like Carl Jaspers discovered psychedelic.
And then ordinary people start talking like mystics.
Yes.
Ultimately, you are loved whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and he also described the moment that you referenced earlier, where if you go all the way into the hardest stuff,
Yeah.
then you find the resource there.
Yeah. And then people literally say there's nothing to fear.
Yes. Yeah.
And the anxiety is gone, even in terminal cancer patients. You
Yeah.
know, death is no longer feared. There's no rush to speed it up.
Yeah.
but they're kind of curious about it instead of frightened by it. Yeah.
This is great. I have to tell you that I teach a lot of therapists getting into this work and I'm still learning myself lifelong, right? So I
Me
don't
too.
don't claim absolute expertise at all. But because I'm in that mentoring and teaching role a lot, one of the mistakes, if I have to call it that, that I think that a lot of therapists make, and I think this comes from mainstream psychotherapy training these days, is they have a bias towards keeping the client safe. And that means in their mind, don't let them get dysregulated or too scared.
Hmm.
And so I think that a lot of times the therapist is pulling them back from this journey that we've been referencing here because of the therapist's own discomfort with the idea that the client or patient is in discomfort.
Hmm.
And so
And
I
let's
just
go
wanted your
through the
thoughts on that.
discomfort together. Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
that?
Let's go through the discomfort together. Yeah.
Yes. So the idea would be to actually be able to say, it's okay to go into this thing that's showing up. You can go into it fully. However, like a phrase that I've learned from other teachers or phrases akin to no matter how far it goes, I will be there with you, or no matter how scary it gets, I will still be here with you. And then you need to be able to let them know that as it does get scary, that you are still there.
That's right. And you can scream and cry if you'd like to, you know?
I have a teacher, Cater Brown. He's great. He says you can cry with your client as long as you're able to stop first.
I like that.
Do. I have to let him know
Yeah,
I
if
can.
not, you got to do some of your own work here. Yeah.
Um, oh gosh. Okay. I also wanted to ask you a couple more things before I let you go because I really appreciate your time. And that is, you have you have given advice on the importance in your lived experience of working with the somatic side of things. That includes the patient or client's somatic sensations, but also the use of touch in
Yes.
service of working somatically. And I know we don't have time today to do a big treatise on how to do these things, but I wanted to ask you about it because one other thing that I see with the communities coming in to get trained is that a lot of psychotherapists are trained in modalities that actually tell you not to touch. Like psychodynamic is famous for that, but also the CBT school of,
Mm.
there's different types of therapy modalities. So I have trainees coming in with somatic backgrounds that they tend to just jump right into this piece. But a lot of people come in with no background with that and I think are wanting to kind of do psychedelic work without that skill set. And we tend to say if you're going to do good psychedelic work, you need to first do some work yourself with getting comfortable working with somatic pieces.
By all means.
Okay. And so I just
Right.
wanted to get your kind of advice to the audience on why that matters.
Definitely. Very important area. And in psychedelic therapy, we need to say without apology that there is such a thing as good touch, you know? And sometimes it would be unethical to withhold that. Okay.
Yes.
Uh,
Or
and
re-traumatizing even.
we always normalize it. We rehearse hand holding, the day before a session. Literally, how does this feel?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I put my hand on your shoulder? Does that feel okay? Uh, and it's not just that you may be so terrified that you need to grab my hand, okay? But our connection may provide a grounding, a being in the world together,
Mm-hmm.
almost as if energy is flowing both directions, you know, at times. If I offer touch or you ask for touch and then don't need it anymore, just say fine, I'm okay, Uh, but the touch is a major way of allowing the person to let go and go more deeply. I think that echoes back to earliest childhood,
Yeah.
the need for human warmth and connection and being in the world with someone,
Yeah, I think there are times, especially when people are in younger states and all, which is, you know, so much of it, that if someone really needs touch and you withhold it, it's abandoning them.
That's right. It
That's
is.
damaging. And so,
And they're not going to get as much out of the experience. Sometimes you need that connection to be able to fall
yeah, feel
backwards into
safe
the
enough to
void,
lean.
if you will.
Yeah.
Or,
So we call that tethering in my community. It's like the tether,
uh,
they'll tether to you, and that allows them to drop in, to feel safe, leaning back and falling back into the experience more. If they're tethered, they know that,
right,
they,
trustlet. And not to besides human touch, the voice of the therapist can be very reassuring. You
Hmm.
know, I'm with you. You're doing fine. Trust, let go, be open, let the music carry you. Uh, are you okay? Are you okay?
Oh gosh, yeah.
If the voice of the therapist is full of anxiety, it's not going to be helpful.
No, gosh. Yeah, they're cueing to you there that you're sure that they're okay, even if they're afraid, you're sure that they're okay. They're cueing to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that because I agree. And I think this you know, training programs there's many training programs out there nowadays. We are one of many. And I hope that all training programs encourage people to get a skill set with somatic work,
That's right.
helping the person
And
track their body and also using touch in appropriate ways.
sure. And the somatic dimension is so much more than touch. It's also if you feel nausea, you don't just complain about it, you dive into your stomach, and often it vanishes instantly. It's a psychosomatic manifestation of anxiety. Okay. If you feel a tremor in your arm, don't try to freeze and hold it, but exaggerate it. And a memory may wake up, that the body, the soma is a language that can teach you something. It's not just a undesirable side effect of a drug if you feel something in your body.
Yes. The body knows so much more than the intellectual mind is aware of.
That's right.
And you spoke earlier about the idea of setting the intellect aside. And this is the natural corollary to that is that let the
That's right.
body speak its own wisdom.
Yeah. Listen to your body.
Yes. So there's two ways that the term somatic kind of includes touch, but it also includes working with the person's awareness of sensations in
Yeah.
their body and checking that out or furthering it or having them notice it more or bringing their attention to it. And so that's another aspect of somatic skills. So I think both those are really critical to have if you're working
Right. And
with
and clearly how much touch you use um is judged somewhat by the particular person you're working with, the history of that person, the culture of that person, um, the guidelines of the clinic in which you're working. Uh, I mean, there's somatic therapy where they're doing extensive massage at times during sessions, and there's also situations where uh, you you wonder if it's okay to touch the person. So there is potential for abuse, you know,
yes. Yeah.
uh,
God,
but it's not, it's in all forms of psychotherapy. It's in relations with professors and lawyers and clergy and whatever. And that's why we need, as therapists, to be well trained, to care for our own needs, to be in community, to discuss what happens in sessions with other providers, you
Mhm.
know, and maintain an ethical, safe standard. But the bottom line is uh, good touch is a very important part of psychedelic therapy. Yeah.
I agree. And I'm glad to hear you say that. Um, and yeah, these safety pieces and ethics pieces are goes without saying are important to teach
Yeah.
trainees, as well as this idea that I use the term do your own work. But what I mean by that is like if you're going to be a facilitator for someone else, then kind of look at your own shadow stuff, look at your own trauma triggers, like have done your own work on yourself so that you don't unconsciously put your baggage, so to speak, into the session with the client. And
That's
I
right.
suspect that some of the cases of boundary violations and things are due to someone who hasn't really self-reflected a lot, maybe as a therapist. And in a way, all we can do with trainees is really ask that they do that on the honor system. Like, really, take it. It's incumbent upon you to really look at your stuff.
Hmm.
And then it's not really a pleasant experience for any of us to do that. But we have the privilege of doing this kind of work with people. Then it comes with a responsibility to do that, to do your own shadow work, as one way to think of it.
You can't be a good therapist without doing your own work. Yeah.
Yeah, not gosh, we could probably talk for an hour on that as well as so many things, but we don't have that much time, so I don't want to keep you too long. Um,
No.
maybe what I'll do is finish with a couple of just for fun questions. And one of those is something my husband wanted me to ask you. We were hanging out last night and I was like, I'm gonna talk to Bill Richards tomorrow. If you just want to ask him anything for fun. And he said, yeah, ask him if he was on a desert island and could only ever have one psychedelic, which one is his favorite?
Well, I have to see what's growing on the island here. Actually, if I was on a desert island, I might not need a psychedelic. A few breaths might be all I needed.
Yeah, that
Uh,
would be an alternate state in and of itself.
uh, I am a strong advocate in the research world of concentrating on psilocybin right now. You know, the idea, let's get one drug besides ketamine, off schedule one, you
Yeah,
know,
that'd be amazing.
and psilocybin has a very long natural history, a very wonderful, safe profile. It's clearly not addictive. It's essentially non-toxic.
Mhm.
Um, it's been used at least 9,000 years, if you look at the archaeological
Yeah.
record here. Um, and I like psilocybin because the duration of action is 6 hours at most, which works into the workday in a clinic. You know, it when you take it, it takes you within the first hour, maybe 40 minutes to uh, kind of the intense part of the day. It's like, let's get right down to business.
Mm.
Okay. And then it terminates gradually, but firmly.
Mm.
At the end of 6 hours, you're back. You know, you could go home, you know. Um, and there's this period when you're coming back, if it's a high dose session, where there's kind of an opportunity for dialogue between, if you will, the eternal part of your mind and the temporal part of your mind.
Hmm.
And I think that might allow for bringing more treasures back to the everyday world, you know, hypothesis
Interesting.
here. Yeah.
Are you saying that the
Uh,
natural, go ahead.
yeah. As opposed to kind of just as with 5-MeO-DMT, kind of zooming into the eternal and zooming back. Uh, I think, I may be wrong, but I think psilocybin may allow for uh, more fruits for life, to use William James's uh, framework. Uh, when
It
you get
sounds like, tell me if I'm right, that you're saying that the natural arc of the medicine, the way it moves through your body and your bloodstream and all of that,
right,
it's such that like the sort of like intense content, there's actually a natural stage in the arc of the medicine where you can start reflecting on the content while still in the experience.
that's right.
And so you come out almost, it's almost like a early integration while still on the medicine, you know, of, is that a fair way to say it or?
Yeah. Well, for the first decade of my life, I primarily worked with LSD in the psychedelic research world. And LSD always lasts at least 8 hours and then maybe 12 hours. It builds up very gradually.
Mm.
So the peak is between the third and the fifth hour. So you're kind of sitting there waiting for the reaction to get stronger. I think
I
it's
hear
kind of
this.
a waste of good therapy time.
Yeah. I
And
think
then LSD terminates with this kind of bouncing ball effect. You're back and then you drift off and you're back and you drift off and you're back and you drift off. But it makes for a very long day, you know?
that is so interesting because, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd want to stress, I think that the strata of experiencing of LSD and psilocybin
Mhm.
and DMT for that matter, uh, and question mark ketamine, uh, are the same. That the
Mhm.
experiences aren't in the drug, they're in the human mind.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was actually, you just preempted my very next question. I love it. You're psychic. Well, before I ask that question, I want to just reflect on what you just said because it's actually really fascinating because what you're speaking to is uh, there's the types of experiences that are opened up with these medicines, like the windows that are opened.
Right.
But some of them, just by the way that they show up at the arc of the experience, are more clinically useful or clinically kind of practical if to use in a clinical setting. And you like psilocybin because like you get right to the good stuff relatively quickly, and then you have this like natural integration while still in the journey, which is actually really fruitful. And so it kind of as a therapist, you think, wow,
Right.
this makes my job easier as a therapist almost
That's right.
compared to some of the other medicines. Yeah, well, that's which is really great because we all need to know this because we are hoping to move into a place where we do use these in clinics, and this is the kind of stuff that will affect our real lives when we're
Yeah.
designing actual clinical practice. And my comment on ketamine in that way, since I have had to move very heavily into ketamine world for the last, it's been almost 8 years now, but because that's the one that we have to use in brick and mortar clinics these
Sure.
days. Um, we have experimented with especially with an IV, you can titrate it. So you can dial
Uh-huh.
it up or dial it down, and you can also make it last as long as you want. And so we have done some work with trying to mimic these different medicines with ketamine, like the longer duration or more intense in the beginning and then less, because it is so controllable. You can adjust
Uh-huh.
the drip rate.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we have sort of landed, and this is just us, but in our actual clinic in Asheville, North Carolina, with a particular 2-hour arc that is designed that like kind of we do every time that does what you've described. It is a gentle onset, but it's relatively rapid, and you go to the journey content relatively quickly. And then the wear off is also gentle, but there's also like a built-in tail where the therapist starts integrating with doing integration type conversation while the client is still in the alternate state in the medicine state. And then there's the real tail when the medicine has left their system and now you're sort of doing what real in early integration. And then the next day you do like quote actual integration. So we developed that because our lived experience was like, wow, this is what works best. So it's just
Yeah.
this really
Well,
practical.
that's a major contribution. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great, Signy. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of mean this, we're fortunate to have that kind of flexibility
I
with
mean,
because of its,
I'm sure you're writing that up in your book or whatever, but there's a lot of ketamine therapists who could learn from that model. Yeah.
yeah, I should be writing it up more, but we have in part of our training program, we have consulting for people setting up clinics like on the medical side. And my husband does a lot of training people to that model because what therapists who are doing this, they need to hear all these things about how to be good therapists that you and I have talked about. But there's
Yeah.
also like, you kind of need some practical, like how to make this work in your clinic day. So that,
That's right.
good stuff. Okay. Well, before I let you go, you preempted this already. But that last question I was going to ask you is, do you think the medicine really matters? Which medicine, or are what we really doing just using these different medicines to open a window into something that is universal to all of them, this alternate state? And you sort of already spoke to it.
Yeah, it would certainly be the second,
Yeah.
that it's not the right medication to give.
Hmm.
But it's well, to back up, let's acknowledge that these many different forms of experience, psychodynamic, archetypal visionary, and transcendental unitive mystical, also happen spontaneously to people without any drug at all. Now, what's going on there are supposedly our bodies naturally generate DMT. So we're all in violation of federal law by virtue of being human. Uh, but people will say, but it's a very small quantity. But then, a few millionths of a gram of LSD take effect. So,
Yeah.
who knows
Pretty
what's
tiny.
going on here? I sometimes wonder if when spontaneous experiences occur, uh, whether uh, there's a little more DMT generated in the body,
Mhm.
or the chemicals that might suppress it are lessened, or whatever. That's a whole another language to talk about uh, psychedelics and the responses. But it's normal human um, experience to have a mystical experience or a profound encounter with unresolved grief or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
and it happens to all kinds of people all the time uh, in meditative retreats, in uh, the midst of being caught up in concerts, either classical or rock, in natural childbirth sometimes, in the runner's high, in the midst of creative fervor, uh, sensory isolation and sensory overload. It's part of being human.
Mhm.
And the value of these psychedelics is their potency and their reliability. In one particular afternoon, we can guarantee that something significant will happen. They are incredibly valuable tools in medicine, yeah,
Mhm.
certainly in psychotherapy. And they may have incredible value in education and religion as well, but those are other chapters.
Yes, those are like full conversations that we could still have. And also, that's a lot. I mean, a lot of what your book speaks to.
That's
Um,
right.
it's something that I would encourage anyone going into this field in any way to reflect on for themselves. We can't dictate that for our clients, for our patients, but it's a little bit artificial to pretend that these spiritual implications of this work aren't there, which you sometimes
Yeah,
see. But I hear you saying this is just part of our legacy as humans, that we have
that's right.
access to this. And these medicines are just doorways into that.
Yeah. Well, bottom line is that we really are more than we tend to think we are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are levels of consciousness that Jung called the collective unconscious, and beyond within each of us. And they're there whether we acknowledge it or experience it or not. They're waiting to be discovered.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's not too grandiose, maybe this is a threshold of human evolution for more of us to live in a bigger world, if you will, to be aware of that we do have our egos, that part of us that scampers around and goes to work and cooks dinner and takes care of our kids and so on, but there also is a part of each of us that is incredibly beautiful and meaningful with implications for art and religion. There's a sacred dimension of being human. Uh, and it's completely independent of allegiance to a particular religious creed or organized religion, though it may be at the origin of all the great world religions.
Well, I cannot think of a better note to end the conversation on than
Okay.
that. That is a beautiful note to end it on. And so I
Well,
want to,
what you're doing, Signi, is beautiful. You're helping to educate the people who can be very helpful to others in the future.
it's an honor. And I'm very aware of the teachers and kind of guidance that has gone before me that supports me in doing that. I have a lot of gratitude for that. You being part of that pool of resources. And thank you very much for doing this. I feel like now we need to do more of them. You once again have been a fun person to talk to. So you once again became
Likewise.
my favorite person to talk to this month. So we need to do it more. Thank you like
Sure.
immensely for being on here today. I feel that our paths will cross relatively soon.
Keep in touch.
Thank you, Bill.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Living Medicine. We'll see you again next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.